Welcome back, everybody, to our second part of our series on the Weber IDF style carburetors. Today, we're going to talk about duals, setting up dual carburetors. A lot of people talk about why we want dual carburetors, and so we're going to answer some of those questions first before we get into setup. Big reason why we want dual carburetors is to make more power. Of course, when you have dual carburetors mounted right above the cylinder heads, it allows you to force more air and fuel into the cylinder faster. Doing so creates more power, as opposed to having a center mount style that has to flow a long distance. But there are some other benefits to them as well, other than just more power. No choke is necessary. The carburetors are so close to the cylinder head and they induce enough fuel and air that the choke is typically never necessary on a dual carburetor setup. And then also, if you've got a chassis on like a rail buggy or something like that, that doesn't that allows it, you can put them in there, but on some cars it does not. So you always want to check that first. And then lastly, if your exhaust system doesn't have heat risers, which is what would be required for a center mount carburetor setup, this is the way to not have to put heat risers on your exhaust. Dual carburetors don't require it because the carburetors are so close to the heat source, the cylinder heads and the cylinders, that they don't have an issue with fuel dropping out whenever the intakes get cool. They don't typically get as cold as the center mount setup does. So some benefits to dual carburetors, but the biggest and most important, let's make some more power. So what we've done is we've kind of unboxed a kit here that is going to have everything we need necessary to put duals on just about any Type 1 engine. In this case, what we highly recommend is you do your initial parts inventory and setup on a bench, not on the car. Reason being is because there's a lot of little pieces and there's a lot of pieces that need to be put together. So it's a good idea to put this stuff together on the bench. And the other reason is because, listen guys, they're aftermarket parts. There may be some adjustments and things that have to be made. In the case of these intake manifolds, we have to put the studs in them. We had to run a tap through them just to clean the threads up because they're tumble polished. It's a little bit hard on the threads sometimes. So just know that those things may come about, and you find that out much easier here than you do inside the engine compartment. So what we've done initially, this is a setup with a hex bar linkage. So we have initially put on the center pull and the end castings that are going to be connected to the carburetors once they get put on the engine. And then we went ahead and put together the adjustment rods. Now the adjustment rods have left-hand threads on one end, right-hand threads on the other. Same thing with the lock nuts that go on them. I tend to try to put both of them on the same end as far as I've got the left-hand thread on the top, right-hand thread on the bottom. It does not matter. On some of the kits, the spacers rods on the bottom are equal length. That's fine. That's all built into the design. Some of them are different lengths depending on the brand. Make sure if you've got the one that is different lengths, one longer, one shorter, that you put them on the correct sides. Remember that carburetors are set staggered because the cylinders are staggered. So you want to make sure whatever ones you put, that number 3-4 side, because it sets more forward of the car, that's going to have the longer rod on it. So we've got this put together and it's all set up ready to go to the car. We have our intake manifolds, already have our threaded studs put in them. Let's talk about the carburetors really quick. We've unboxed our carburetor. Now it would not come with this plate on it already. We put that on there. But as we mentioned in the previous video, we're going to do the exact same process on duals as we would on singles. We're going to take it apart. We're going to flush it out with some brake cleaner, carburetor cleaner, and air. Make sure it's good and clean inside. Set your choke level to the factory specified setting, and then put that all back together. Then we can also go in, we can set our idle mixture screws at 1 to 1.5 turns out from being fully seated. And then we can also even initially set up our idle speed. And I'll show it again on the engine in a little bit, but we want that to be where it just touches and then a half turn in from just touching. That'll be our base setting. With that done and the carb base set on it, we're ready to go to the engine and start putting this thing together. All right, guys, so once we have our initial setup of our hex bar completed over on the bench, now we're ready to head over to the engine and start putting things together. So initially, we're going to bolt on the intake manifolds in place of our old end castings, and then we're going to move over to the carburetors themselves. You'll want to bolt one carburetor down completely solid, but not the other one just yet, because you got to be able to fit this hex bar linkage in there. So make sure that you leave one of them loose until you get the linkage set into place. Once it's in place up on the pivot ball, then you can bolt the carburetor down. So now that we have that the carburetors in place, now we can move to initial adjustment of the carburetors before we hook up the linkage. We've hooked up one side, but that's okay. The other side we're going to leave loose. That way we can adjust them independently. The initial adjustment is going to be in the idle speed screw itself, where we're going to set it at that half in from being closed. So we adjust it till we just see it touch, and then we give it a half turn rotation. That one will be set to that. We'll do the exact same thing on the other carburetor. That way the initial base setting is accurate. Does not mean that it's going to be completely there. That'll just get us to a start position. Once we've got those set, we've got our idle mixture screws turned out from seated about 1.5 turns. We know the carburetors are in a pretty good place to be able to start up. Now we're going to move on to firing this thing up. Once it's fired up, then we'll start sinking the carburetors. And we're going to do that with our sync tool, sometimes called the snail tool. Now you notice it's got graduated numbers on it. And what this does is this reads the amount of airflow through each venturi for each cylinder. That way we can make sure we can adjust these carburetors to where we can get the exact same flow in every one of them. That's what syncing is, that not only both carburetors, but all 4 cylinders are flowing the exact same number. With the engine warmed up, we would set the sync tool on top of the velocity stack and we'd read the number that it has and make note of it. Do that for each velocity stack until we have it a reading for each one. Once we have a reading, then we can start making adjustments to make them equal. A lot of times we'll find even after setting these what we thought was exactly the same, they're slightly different. Say for instance, one side's pulling 5 and this one over here is pulling 7. That means this one's flowing more air. In essence, this one is slightly open more. So we have an option of either lowering this one down to 5 or raising this one up to 7. That's going to depend on what our idle speed is and what we want it to be. If our idle speed is really low to begin with, when we first have it warmed up, it needs to come up, we'll raise this one up to the 7 to match the other one. If it's already kind of high, we'll probably bring the 7 down to the 5 to match the other side and see what that idle speed looks like. If at that point, if we brought that down and all 4 of them match the same, technically our carburetors are synced. The only thing left to do would be to sync the linkage, make sure the linkage is connected and not making any adjustments. If for some reason we've got we have one cylinder that is just slightly lower than the others, we can actually adjust that out. And that's something we want to pay attention to. Say we've got them all set to 7 or 5 or whatever it is, say 5, but one of them for whatever reason is 3.5 or 4.5. If it's at 4.5 and this one's at 5, we can open up the air bleed screw and after opening the lock nut loose, we can back the adjuster out just a couple turns at the very most. 1.5 turns is about all you really want to turn that out. And that will usually bring that one up. You're allowing more air into that side. That's going to allow it to flow a little bit more. That will usually even them all out. Once that's done, now we're ready to hook up the linkage. Like I said, we've initially set the linkage on this side. The jam nuts are loose, so we can twist the rods to lengthen or shorten the rods. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now, when we go to connect the other side, what we want to make sure we do, it's super important, is that this just drops straight in. If it doesn't sit flat, then we need to adjust the linkage rod to allow it to sit flat. What we don't want to do is we don't want one side to be pulling the other one, which is a very common problem whenever these are getting initially set up. So we make that adjustment to where it just slides in and seats flat, and we tighten it down. Once that's connected and tightened down, we're going to go back and just feel our rods to make sure everything has got just a little bit of movement so that nothing is super over tight, which means it's getting pulled on. Once that's done and we know that everything has just a slight bit of movement, we're going to lock all these lock nuts down. We want everything to stay tight because that's usually when something comes out of sync, is because something's come loose. So we're going to tighten down all of the adjuster nuts, all the lock nuts. And once those are all tightened down, we're ready to fire this thing back up and double check that we didn't make any changes. Start it back up and once again go over it with the sync tool, making certain that we have no other issues, that all of them are still reading equal. At that point, with the sync tool on each cylinder, we can make adjustments to our idle mixture. It will have some effect sometimes with the flow reading on the sync tool. The idle mixture can have a little bit of an effect there. So we just want to make sure that we're keeping in sync as we're adjusting our idle mixture. Once that's all set, guys, and this thing is tightened down, we now have a dual carburetor setup that's installed, synced, and ready to run. If you decide from that point that anything else needs to be changed, Just make sure any changes or modifications that are done, you always double check the syncing. And if that's all good, go ahead and put your air cleaners on. You're ready to drive. It's ready to go enjoy the power that these things are able to put out. And if for some reason you get through that part of it and you're struggling with it, or you're having issues you can't seem to overcome, give us a call. We're more than happy to try to help walk you through some things. We can do what we can over the phone, or worst case scenario, you're welcome to bring it down. We can schedule a time where we can take a look at it for you and see what we can do to help you out. Thanks again.